And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Well, we are getting closer to the start of training camps, and that means our division countdown previews continue with Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com. Don't forget to check out the Inside the Birds podcast and their YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. Well, we are almost through the AFC, Andrew, which means we are getting closer to the start of training camp. The Hall of Fame game, August the 1st. The Eagles report July 23rd, and everybody is chasing the AFC West champion Kansas City Chiefs. So today, we're going to take a look at the AFC West. What's up, my brother? How are you?
Doing well, Mike. How about yourself?
Always good, man. And as we get through these things, we're taking a look at some of the competitors. We've done a lot of these other divisions, and they all seem to have interesting storylines. Before we look at the individual teams here, the Chiefs seem to be the biggest favorite in any of the divisions, maybe them in San Francisco. It seems that this might be, other than the Chiefs, one of the weaker divisions in football this year.
Yeah, just looking at it from a 30,000-foot view, you can argue that, but I would also say that while the Chiefs may look like they're the class of this division, there's another team that we're going to get into in a little bit here that I think is actually going to challenge them for division supremacy there.
All right. By the way, Chiefs 11-6, Vegas 8-9, Denver 8-9, the Chargers 5-12. Just one team with a winning record last year in the AFC West. They were the Super Bowl champion Chiefs. So let's start with them. Obviously, they win the Super Bowl, but they have a little bit of a new look this year. They've got some different weapons on the offensive side of the ball. Vineland's Isaiah Pacheco is back now for his third year. We know Travis Kelce. They got a really good offensive line. But what's different about the Chiefs' offense now?
Well, they've added a lot of speed at wide receiver, and Xavier Worthy, of course, through the draft, he set a 40-yard dash record at the NFL Scouting Combine, runs a 4.22. I believe that was his total. And then you have Hollywood Brown, who I think is a really good acquisition there. It's going to help spread things out offensively for the Chiefs. Rashee Rice is a big question mark there. Obviously, he's had some legal troubles this offseason, so I don't necessarily know how that's going to pan out. I don't know if he's going to factor into their immediate equation. And then Kadarius Toney is still there as a depth wide receiver. And, of course, Travis Kelce being the mainstay, that centerpiece of their offense at tight end.
Yeah, we know that obviously Mahomes makes it all go, but let's talk about Pacheco now in his third year. Obviously, Vineland, Rutgers. What does he add? What does he bring to this offense that kind of helps make it what it is?
Well, Isaiah Pacheco is not only is he a good receiving running back, I think one of his prominent traits is that he's a physical downhill runner. He has really good contact balance and a nose for the end zone. And he's actually one of my favorite runners to watch because he is such a multifaceted running back, and he doesn't get necessarily the credit. He's maybe not even a household name at this point, but I think that he adds a tremendous balance to that offense and his ability to not only win in a finesse way, but also with physicality downhill.
They took Xavier Worthy, the wide receiver. There was a lot of talk about that trade on draft night. What does he bring to the offense?
Speed, long speed down the field. You know, again, this is on paper. Sometimes the learning curve for a young wide receiver, it doesn't always happen right away. But I think in a perfect scenario, you're getting a Tyreek Hill-esque player who can really stretch teams vertically and put unique stresses on secondaries, but also open things up for the middle of the field for Travis Kelce as if he needs any extra help. And ultimately, I think Hollywood Brown, you can make a case for him as well, being able to definitely plug in on the outside, and you know what you're going to get from him, and I think he can also affect the game in the same way.
Talking to Andrew DiCecco, our division previews, looking at the Chiefs. Let's go to defense. One of the things I love about doing these is, you know, you and I talk about the draft so much, and then you see these guys, Karlaftis, Trent McDuffie, Nick Bolton. Those are names that we talked so much about around the draft a couple of years ago. Well, now here they are around Chris Jones. What does this Chiefs defense look like?
It's still a fast-flowing physical defense. You mentioned George Karlaftis. Chris Jones is the centerpiece there in the middle of that defensive line. And then Mike Dana is a player who I like a lot. Doesn't necessarily get the fanfare. He was a free agent that I thought the Eagles might want to take a look at and get a cost-effective player who can help them, but he returns to Kansas City. And then linebacker Nick Bolton, Leo Chenal, who I like a lot coming out of the draft a couple of years ago, and Drew Tranquill, who the Eagles had some interest in, I guess it was a couple of years ago. So they have a really good linebacking core. But to me, I think that their secondary really embodies development and sort of allowing teams to get those startup costs out of the way and young players to make those mistakes. And Trent McDuffie, Brian Cook, they drafted Jaden Hicks from Washington State as safety in the 4th round, and Justin Reed's still there as well.
All right, everybody thinks they're the favorite. Let's take a look at the challengers. Let's go to Vegas. They were 8-9 last year. Quarterback situation. Let's start there. Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew. We know Minshew is kind of a journeyman. He's one of those guys that can be a backup and get you through. Aiden O'Connell, is he a guy that's a starting level quarterback? He's probably going to be the guy for the Raiders.
No, I don't think Aiden O'Connell is a starting caliber quarterback. He's very limited, and the offense is ultimately going to be at his mercy. And I don't think he's equipped to maximize the talent that they have there. I think ultimately you're going to see Gardner Minshew take the reins, win out in training camp. He did some really good things to the Colts last year. And look, you know what you're going to get out of Gardner. He's not someone that's going to elevate an offense, but I think he can competently pilot that offense and have them on the right track.
Devontae Adams was on the Receiver Show on Netflix the other day, and he was kind of complaining about Jimmy Garoppolo. Is he going to have more complaints with this crew?
I think he'll have less complaints compared to Jimmy Garoppolo because I think Gardner Minshew, you're getting a baseline level of production, and you know that he's willing to push the ball down the field. He doesn't have the arm strength to do so, but he can keep the offense on schedule with those short to intermediary throws. And I think he's someone that's going to incorporate a bunch of different weapons offensively, and not just kind of hone in on one player. So you've seen enough from Gardner Minshew to be able to determine that he's not as streaky or volatile as someone like Jimmy Garoppolo, who I thought was criminally underrated. He had a really strong arm, but I thought too often when he was off that day, the offense just never was able to get on track and get things headed in the right direction. But I think there's less variance with someone like Gardner Minshew.
All right, they have Adams, still one of the best receivers in the league. What else is there? There's a lot of unknowns, I guess, around him at wide receiver and running back.
Well, they also added Michael Gallup. Of course, he was a long-time Dallas Cowboy who has some speed but struggled with some injuries. Jacoby Myers, I think, is criminally underrated. He's a really good possession guy, someone who's going to take a lot of targets over the middle of the field. He's not going to win vertically very often, but he's someone who can be a security blanket for a quarterback. Like when you're looking at Gardner Minshew, I think Jacoby Myers is essential to his growth and getting that offense headed in that direction. And Brock Bowers, the tight end, right? I mean, they took him in the 1st round, explosive 3-level threat, really good red zone weapon. A good tight end is a quarterback's best friend, particularly one that has limitations. So I think utilizing the middle of the field and having that safety valve will be essential.
Yeah, you look around at this offense with Adams and Myers and Gallup, you would think Bowers should have a big role. They did bring in Alexander Madison, the former Vikings running back, Zamir Whitehair, Amir Abdullah. So the running back situation, we'll see what happens with Vegas. They drafted 2 offensive linemen in the 2nd and 3rd rounds there, so they're trying to beef up that line. But on the defensive side of the ball, Crosby, Christian Wilkins they brought in there. So they got a pretty good up front. Our old friend Marcus Epps is there as well. What do you think about this Raiders defense?
Yeah, and on the defensive line, they also have former Eagle Janaris Robinson, who I always really liked and was intrigued by due to his wingspan and athleticism, but it never panned out in Philadelphia. But he sort of carved out a rotational role there on their defensive line. Look, I really like their secondary, and to a certain degree. Like, I like Marcus Epps, the former Eagle. They drafted Cameron Richardson in the 4th round. He was a player that was rising up draft boards throughout the entire process. So I thought they got really good value there, but they don't have a lot of building blocks on the back end. We haven't even mentioned Tyree Wilson. Tyree Wilson was their 1st-round pick in 2023. And, I think that they didn't get in necessarily what they were expecting out of him, but he's a player that I'm highlighting to have a big sophomore leap here as well. I'm not crazy about their linebacker situation. Divine Diablo is a player I really liked at Virginia Tech, but he's more of a hybrid player. He doesn't run particularly well, and I don't know that he really elevates that unit very much. And Robert Spillane, I liked him when he was with the Steelers as a spot starter, as a situational player. He's a very physical player, hard hitter, but he also has some limitations. So their 2nd level and secondary, I think, have some legitimate questions.
All right, Antonio Pierce, he's now the full-time head coach in Vegas. That's what he's got to work with. 8-9 last year for the Raiders. Also 8-9 was Denver. They lost Russell Wilson. They're going to try to replace him with this trio of Jarrett Stidham, Bo Nix, and Zach Wilson. Is there a betting favorite for you?
Out of that motley crew of three that you just mentioned, I would say Zach Wilson is probably the favorite to start, just given his experience. Now, I don't know that he's going to be someone that holds on to that job for the entirety of the season. I think eventually he'll give way to Bo Nix, being that Nix was a first-round pick, but neither one of those options are very enticing. Nevertheless, that's what they have to choose from.
What's your favorite Motley Crue album, by the way?
I like Dr. Feelgood. My favorite Motley Crue song is off the Girls, Girls, Girls album. That would be Wild Side. But I think that we could go Dr. Feelgood.
DiCecco, by the way, could go as in-depth on the Motley Crue series, I'm sure, as he could this division right now. All right. By the way, the betting odds are out. Bo Nix is the favorite. Jarrett Stidham was second. And the longest shot to be the starter in week one was actually Zach Wilson. But I tend to agree with you. I'm kind of more intrigued by Wilson with Peyton. I think Peyton gives Wilson a shot and feels like, hey, I can make this a reclamation project, but that will be a story to watch out here. A lot of people thought, Andrew, when they got Russell Wilson, it was because this was a team on the precipice of being a Super Bowl roster. Where are they on the offensive side now?
I really don't think that they have enough pieces offensively to make much of a dent in this division. I like Javonte Williams, their running back. They also have a competent backup in Samaje Perine, who's really bounced around the NFL. I like them with the Bengals especially. And they drafted Audric Estime from Notre Dame in the 5th round in 2024. So they have enough running backs, I think, that can really – they're going to have to utilize them, because I don't think offensively, from a receiving standpoint, they have a lot there. They have Cortland Sutton. They have Josh Reynolds, who's been a journeyman. Marvin Mims is a player who is a little bit more on the finesse side, but more of a slot guy in my estimation. Adam Trout, their tight end situation is really dismal in my opinion. Adam Troutman, formerly of the New Orleans Saints, you may remember. Greg Dulcich never really panned out. He struggled with injuries. I had high hopes for him. So I just think as a quarterback that really is going to be grasping at straws in terms of trying to conjure production to not have that tight end or really a bona fide receiving option really stunts their progress.
Yeah, and obviously the quarterback spot is going to be a big question mark for them on top of all the things that you just brought up. Go to defense where, man, a couple of years ago, they had a really stingy defense. Where does that defense now? Our old buddy Alex Singleton's over there. Patrick Surtain, we heard a lot about possible trade rumors in the offseason. Baron Browning's a linebacker I remember talking about draft time with you a couple of years ago. So there's some pieces over there, but it doesn't feel that this defense is where it was maybe 2 years ago.
No, certainly not. I mean, they do have some pieces, which you outlined, but they have Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers on the defensive line. John Franklin Myers is a player that I like, but not necessarily as someone who you're going to hang your hat on, more of a complimentary piece. Then at linebacker, you mentioned Baron Browning from Ohio State, who we like for his length. As when the Eagles were looking at linebackers in the middle rounds a couple of years ago, Cody Barton comes over from the Commanders. He's a really limited player, doesn't run really well. I think he's been more of a liability than he has been an asset. Then Alex Singleton is a tackling machine. He's still a player that you kind of know what you're getting, but and he doesn't necessarily move the needle, but I think he's really consistent, if nothing else. And they added Jonah Ellis, one of the Ellis brothers, Christian Ellis, of course, a former Eagle. They drafted Jonah in the 3rd round. He's a undersized pass rusher from Utah, who I think if you're able to refine his skill set and have him add a little bit of strength and develop his play strength, I think he's going to be a factor as rushing the passer. And then defensive backs, you have Pat Surtain at corner, who's arguably the best corner in the NFL. They've also added Brandon Jones, a free agent safety who comes over from the Dolphins. And Jaquan McMillan, their nickelback, is a player that I want to highlight for a second because I think that he's a former undrafted free agent, but I also think that he's a player that when you look at Eagles defensive backs coach Christian Parker, that's a player that I thought that he really developed and maximized his ability and got him elevating to a starting caliber role.
All right, Andrew, let's go to the basement of the West last year. They won 5 games. A little bit of a surprise. That had to do with Herbert getting hurt. Justin Herbert back. Some of the weapons have changed, though. Keenan Allen's gone. Mike Williams gone. So you take a look at what they have left there. They bring in Disley. They drafted McConkey. What else is there? They also lost the running back there. So this is a completely new offense and, of course, a new coach in Harbaugh.
Yeah, no Austin Eckler, who you alluded to, but the key is going to be keeping Justin Herbert upright and healthy, and if they're able to do so, they're going to make some serious headway in this division. Their running backs they looks like they just pretty much pilfered the Ravens.
The Ravens,
backfield.
right.
They have J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. Kamani Vital's an interesting player because I really liked him from Troy, coming out of Troy. He kind of reminds me of a souped-up Darren Sproles in that he's just a little bit bigger than Darren was when he was coming out. They drafted him in the 6th round, so he's a good third-down, change-of-pace guy. Wide receiver, they have Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston, who was their first-round pick in 2023. Doesn't separate really well, hasn't panned out to this point, but there obviously a lot is riding on his development. Ladd McConkey from Georgia, who they drafted in the 2nd round, is somebody who I think is really going to factor prominently early. And let's not forget, they also added DJ Chark, so it's not a completely young room, the veteran who's bounced around to a number of different teams. And Brendan Rice, the son of the great Jerry Rice, they drafted him in the 7th round in April. So I think that they have a lot of really a mixture of young players and that veteran DJ Chark that could really help Justin Herbert.
Yep, that's going to be a new-look Chargers team and a new look coach there, obviously, with Harbaugh there. We'll see what he brings to the table. Joe Alt was their first-round pick. Rashawn Slater, their offensive line, a couple nice pieces up front for the Chargers, and you'll take a look at their defense. They got a lot of guys. Obviously, Bosa. They drafted Colson, Khalil Mack's there, Derwin James. I mean, this is a team, Asante Samuel Jr., you would think can win some games with this defense.
Yeah, Joey Bosa and Puna Ford at nose tackle is someone he's undersized, but he finds a way to utilize leverage to his advantage. I like that. They drafted Junior Colson in the 3rd round. You may remember back to our draft conversations, I thought that Junior Colson was the most talented linebacker coming out of the draft. I thought he's the best in coverage, the most well-rounded player. Obviously, he reunites with Jim Harbaugh and defensive coordinator Jesse Minter, who, of course, comes over from Michigan. Denzel Perryman and Khalil Mack are also there at linebacker. And then looking at the secondary, you mentioned Asante Samuel Jr. I like his short area quickness, his ball skills. Derwin James is probably the most versatile safety in the NFL. They also brought over Christian Fulton from the Tennessee Titans, who was a former first-round pick, if my memory serves. And in the draft, they got Cam Hart from Notre Dame. I spoke to Cam Hart at the NFL Scouting Combine. I really liked him. I think they got a value getting him in the 5th round. I thought he was more of a 3rd-round talent. And then Tarheeb Still, cornerback from Maryland, they got in the 5th round. I had a chance to see him up close at Maryland's Pro Day. He's got some potential, and I think he could even be the starting nickel for them. So they do have a lot of pieces there that I like.
All right, Andrew, there's the 4. Kansas City, heavy favorite in here, and obviously everybody else last year, none of them had a winning record. So what do we see in the AFC West? Who's a challenger to KC's throne?
So I have it, the Chargers finishing at the top at the 1 spot, Kansas City at 2, the Raiders finishing 3rd, and the Broncos, they're the basement dwellers of this division in the 4th spot.
Wow, so you like Harbaugh and what they've added that much to go from – every year there's a team that goes from worst to first. You like the Chargers to be that team.
I love the Chargers. I like what they've done this offseason, and I think that if you're able to keep Justin Herbert healthy, obviously that's the key. We see what they are without him. If they're able to do that, you're going to have a team that I think can make some Super Bowl – should be considered as a Super Bowl contender.
Wow. All right, Andrew DiCecco, before we let you run, have you been watching any of the Hard Knocks?
No, I haven't had a lot of time this offseason to watch any Hard Knocks, but I have been sort of monitoring clips that are on Twitter and surfacing and things like that.
Yeah, the whole dynamic between Saquon, the Giants, and what happened with the Eagles seems to be a big storyline here. And it seemed in Tuesday's episode that Joe Shane basically said, hey, go see what you're worth, circle back to us, and we'll let you know. And voila, Saquon Barkley's in Philadelphia. So I don't know if it feels like the Giants just never wanted him back, but for whatever it is, it seems like it's setting up a lot of Giant Philadelphia fun this year.
Yeah, I think Joe Shane clearly misread the market, and the Eagles are paying Saquon to be a special player. So we'll see if they're able to get those type of returns from him. Obviously, I think he's going to be a factor in the passing game, which is a critical element when you consider that DeAndre Swift, who was here last year, was a very prolific pass receiving running back, and we had 39 receptions. I think in order for the Eagles to get that special that special qualities that they're expecting out of Saquon, they're going to need to be able to tap into his multifaceted skill set.
Good stuff, man. As always, the AFC West, our division previews continue next week. We'll go over to the NFC side, which means we're that much closer to the start of the season with Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast. Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, everybody here on Football at 4.